Chapter 1. The Battle Gone Wrong. A peaceful afternoon interrupted. The Hun sun hung high in the sky, its golden rays filtering through the canopy of trees as Ash, May, Brock and Max strolled along a quiet forest path. The day had started like any other, with laughter, friendly banter, and the occasional Pokémon battle to keep things lively. "All right guys, let's take a break here," Brock announced, pointing to a small clearing beside a sparkling river. The sound of running water mixed with the chirping of Tylo in the distance, making the spot seem perfect for a quick rest. "Benling. Gandar," May said, practically dropping her bulging bag to the ground with a dramatic sigh. She stretched her arms overhead, her back popping audibly. Her Torchic immediately hopped out of its Pokeball, chirping happily as it began pecking at the ground. "I thought we were going to keep walking forever." "You call this forever?" Max teased, adjusting his glasses as he sat down cross-legged on a flat rock. "We've only been walking for 2 hours. "Exactly," May replied, shooting him a playful glare. "That's 2 hours too long. Next time you can carry my bag. Maybe if you didn't pack half of Hen you wouldn't be complaining." Max smirked, gesturing toward her overstuffed bag. "What do you even have in there? A tent? A backup tent? And why do you need so much makeup? It's not like the Pokémon care if you look good." "Why you?" May's hands balled into fists as her cheeks turned red. She took a deep breath, clearly about to launch into a full-on tirade, but Brock stepped in like the seasoned referee he was. "All right, you two. Enough," Brock said, holding up his hands in a calming gesture. "We're supposed to be relaxing. Let's not turn this into another sibling squabble." He crouched down and began unpacking lunch from his bag. Sandwiches, fresh fruit, and a few carefully prepared Pokeblocks for their Pokémon. Ash plopped down near the riverbank, tossing his hat aside as he stretched out on the cool grass. Pikachu hopped off his shoulder and trotted over to the edge of the water, lapping at the crystal-clear stream. "Man, this is nice," Ash said, lying back with his hands behind his head. He closed his eyes, soaking in the peaceful sounds of the forest. No battles, no Team Rocket, just peace and quiet. May, who'd finally settled down, sat cross-legged on the ground beside Torchic. She rolled her eyes. "You just had to say it out loud, didn't you?" "Say what?" Ash asked, looking at her in confusion. "That everything's quiet," May replied, narrowing her eyes at him. "You're practically asking for something too." As if on cue, a familiar voice rang out from the forest, cutting through the tranquil afternoon like a thunderclap. "Did somebody say Team Rocket?" Ash bolted upright, groaning as Jessie, James and Mouth stepped dramatically into the clearing. "Oh, come on," Ash groaned, slapping his forehead. "Can't we get one day without you guys showing up? Not while there's a Pikachu to steal." Meowth snapped back, wagging a clawed finger at Ash. "Prepare for trouble," Jessie declared, tossing her hair as she struck her signature pose. "And make it double," James added, mirroring her with practiced flair. "Oh no, not this again," May muttered, crossing her arms. "Pikachu," Pikachu growled, sparks already crackling from its cheeks as it hopped onto Ash's shoulder. "Pikachu, are you ready for this?" Ash asked, clenching his fists. "Pika.K," Pikachu replied, crouching low in anticipation. But something was different this time. Instead of their usual goofy schemes, Team Rocket was wheeling out a large, menacing-looking device. A sleek cannon mounted on a tripod, glowing ominously with green energy. Guys," Max said nervously, inching behind Brock. "That doesn't look like their usual junk." "You're right to be scared," Jessie sighed, laughing as she gestured grandly toward the machine. "This is our newest invention, courtesy of Team Rocket's R&D department," James announced, patting the cannon like it was a prize sports car. "We call it the Trainer Disabler 9000, Jessie added, her eyes gleaming with malicious glee. I'm a disable all. So, Brock repeated, his eyebrows furrowing. What does that even mean? May asked, glancing between the cannon and the grinning trio. It means, Meowth said, stepping forward with a smug grin, that once we fire this baby, you pesky kids won't be able to battle or call out your Pokémon for hours. No Pokémon, no interference. And that means Pikachu is as good as ours. Ash's stomach sank as he stared at the cannon. This wasn't their usual ridiculous contraption held together with duct tape and bad ideas. This thing looked dangerous. You guys aren't getting away with this, Ash shouted, stepping forward. Jessie smirked, her hand hovering over the cannon's console. Oh, we'll see about that. Allow me to demonstrate. Before anyone could react, she slammed a button, and the cannon roared to life, firing a pulse of green energy that hurtled toward them. Everyone move, Brock yelled, grabbing Max and diving to the side. Ash threw himself flat on the ground, shielding Pikachu with his arms as the green pulse streaked overhead, narrowly missing them. The blast hit a tree behind them, and with a loud crack, the trunk glowed green before collapsing in a puff of smoke. Okay, yeah, that's bad, May said, her voice high-pitched as she scrambled to her feet. Pikachu, use Thunderbolt, don't I know? Ash shouted, pointing at the cannon. Pikachu! Pikachu cried, unleashing a bolt of electricity toward the machine. But the cannon's surface shimmered, deflecting the attack like it was nothing. Ha! James laughed, striking a triumphant pose. Did we forget to mention it's also shielded against electricity? This is so unfair, May shouted, clutching Torchic protectively as the little Pokémon chirped nervously. Nothing's ever fair with them, Max muttered, peeking out from behind Brock. Any bright ideas, Brock? Ash asked, glancing at his friend. Indale now. I'm working on it, Brock said, scanning the clearing for anything they could use to disable the cannon. Meanwhile, Jessie cackled, her hand hovering over the console again. Let's see how you handle another round. The cannon began to hum ominously, the glow of its energy building. Scatter! Ash yelled, grabbing May's arm and pulling her to the side just as another green pulse fired, tearing through the spot where they'd been standing seconds earlier. This is not how I wanted to spend my afternoon, May yelled, ducking behind a boulder. Yeah, well, welcome to my life. Ash shot back, crouching beside her. Less talking, more strategizing. Brock called over from his hiding spot. Ash's mind raced as he glanced between the cannon and Team Rocket. They had to take that thing out. Fast. All right, here's the plan, he said, turning to May. We need to distract them long enough for Pikachu to get a clear shot at the tripod. If we can knock it over, that should disable the cannon. Got it, May said, her expression serious. What's the distraction? Ash grinned. You and Max. What? May hissed, her eyes wide. Just trust me, Ash said, already moving. You're good at yelling. Use it to your advantage. Hey? May shouted after him, but he was already gone, darting toward Pikachu. Yelling, she muttered, glaring at the spot where he'd been. I'll show you yelling. Look out, Brock yelled, lunging forward and shoving Max out of the way, just as the green pulse struck the ground where he and May had been standing. The explosion sent a shockwave rippling through the clearing, dirt and debris flying everywhere. Ash shielded his face with his arm, squinting through the chaos as the group scrambled in different directions. Everyone, spread out, Brock yelled, his voice cutting through the ringing in Ash's ears. The cannon was already charging up for another shot, its ominous hum growing louder. Pikachu, use Thunderbolts. Tottehill, Ash shouted, pointing toward the machine. Pikachu. Pikachu unleashed a crackling bolt of electricity, the air around it sizzling with energy. but the attack fizzled out harmlessly against a shimmering green barrier surrounding the cannon. "Nice try, twerp, but this baby's got defenses," Meowth taunted, waving a paw from behind the cannon. "Of course it does," Ash muttered under his breath, frustration bubbling to the surface. He clenched his fists, his mind racing for a strategy. Behind him, May had crouched down by Torchic, her arms protectively around the little Pokémon as it chirped nervously. "It's okay, Torchic," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've got you." "May, get back," Ash yelled as he and Brock darted forward, trying to flank the cannon. But May wasn't listening. Her focus was entirely on Torchic, who was hopping anxiously, its tiny wings flapping in distress. Then, the cannon fired again. The pulse of green energy tore through the clearing, heading straight for May and Torchic. "May, move," Max screamed, his voice cracking with panic. But May didn't move. Without hesitation, she threw herself in front of Torchic, shielding it with her body. "No, no," Ash roared, his heart leaping into his throat. The energy struck her square in the chest. The impact sent her flying backward, a pained cry escaping her lips before she hit the ground with a sickening thud. "May, Dendau, in the Khan's ward, Max's scream cut through the air as he bolted toward her, but Brock grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Stay back, Max," Brock ordered, his voice firm. "It's not safe yet." Torchic let out a shrill, distressed cry, hopping frantically around May's motionless body. Ash froze, his eyes locked on her crumpled form. For a moment, everything around him seemed to blur. The hum of the cannon, the shouting, even the pounding of his own heart. "May," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, anger surged through him, hot and unrelenting. His hands balled into fists as he turned to face Team Rocket, his eyes blazing. "You're going to pay for that," he roared, his voice trembling with fury. "Pikachu, Iron Tail. Pika, Dog, Din." Pikachu leapt into the air, its tail glowing silver as it shot toward the cannon like a missile. With a resounding clang, its tail smashed into the machine, sending sparks flying. The barrier flickered, its glow dimming. "Brock, now," Ash yelled, his voice sharp with urgency. "Geodude, use rock throw Yens." Brock commanded, his hand thrusting forward. "Geodude," the Pokémon bellowed, hurling a barrage of large rocks at the cannon. The boulders slammed into its outer shell, shattering it with a deafening crack. The machine sputtered and whined, smoke pouring from its cracks as it began to shake violently. "This isn't over," Jessie yelled, grabbing Mouth and James by their collars as the cannon exploded behind them, in a burst of light and sound. "Let's retreat while we still can," James shouted, flailing as Jessie dragged him backward. Team Rockets blasting off again. "Aye!" they cried in unison, their voices fading into the distance as they disappeared into the sky. The clearing fell silent, save for the crackling of the damaged cannon and the soft rustle of leaves in the aftermath of the battle. Ash didn't waste a second. He sprinted to May's side, dropping to his knees beside her. "May, Daito," he said, his voice trembling. He reached out, gently shaking her shoulder. "May, wake up. Come on, wake up." She didn't respond. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, and her breathing was shallow. Torchic nuzzled her cheek, letting out soft, distressed chirps as it hopped around her. "Rock, B," Ash yelled, panic rising in his chest. "Do something." Brock was already there, kneeling beside her and pulling a small medical kit from his bag. His expression was grim as he checked her pulse, his fingers pressing gently against her neck. "She's alive," Brock said, relief evident in his voice. "But that blast took a lot out of her. We need to get her to a hospital. Now." Now. Max dropped to his knees on May's other side, tears streaming down his face. "This is my fault," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I should have done something. I should do." "Max, stop," Brock said firmly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This isn't your fault." "But she saved Torchic," Ash interrupted, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. He looked at Max, his expression serious. "And now we have to save her. Brock's right. We need to move." Without another word, Ash carefully slipped his arms under May, lifting her as gently as he could. She felt too light in his arms, her head lolling against his chest. Torchic hopped up onto Ash's shoulder, chirping nervously as if refusing to leave her side. "Pikachu, lead the way," Ash said, his voice resolute. "Pika, P." Pikachu nodded, darting ahead toward the nearest path. Brock quickly packed up what little supplies they had left, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "We'll head to the Pokémon Center in Petalburg," he said. "No, no. It's the closest place with proper medical equipment." Max wiped his eyes on his sleeve, nodding shakily as he followed close behind. Ash glanced down at May's pale face, his jaw tightening. "Hang in there, May," he whispered. "We're going to get you help. Just hold on." The group moved quickly, their usual light-hearted banter replaced by an urgent silence. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the forest, accompanied only by the occasional chirp of Torchic and the determined cries of Pikachu leading the way. Ash's arms ached, but he didn't care. All he could think about was getting May to safety, getting her to open her eyes, to sit up and start arguing with Max about something ridiculous. Because the thought of anything else happening to her was unbearable, Ash scooped May into his arms, her body limp and far too still. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her hair brushing his cheek. "Hang on, May," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to get you help. Just hang on." Every step felt heavier than the last, as they sprinted down the narrow forest path, the crunch of leaves and twigs under their feet, drowned out by the pounding of Ash's heart. Pikachu ran just ahead, its ears perked and sparks flickering faintly from its cheeks, as if ready to fight off any threat that dared to appear. Torchic scrambled alongside, letting out soft, distressed chirps, its tiny legs working overtime to keep up. Max trailed behind, clutching May's bag to his chest like it was a lifeline. His face was pale and tear-streaked, his glasses askew, but he didn't seem to care. "This is all my fault," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I should have protected her. I should have done something." "Don't blame yourself, Max," Brock said firmly, his voice cutting through the panic like a steady anchor. "Team Rocket ambushed us. There was no way you could have known this would happen. But she got hurt because of me." Max cried, his steps faltering. She jumped in front of Torchic because I wasn't fast enough to help." Brock slowed just enough to place a reassuring hand on Max's shoulder, steering him forward. "Listen to me," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "May made a choice to protect Torchic. That's not on you. Right now, the best thing you can do for her is to stay strong and keep moving." Ash's mind raced as they ran, his arms burning from the weight of carrying May. He barely noticed. All he could think about was the moment she had collapsed. The sound of her cry, the way she had hit the ground with terrifying finality. "This is my fault," he thought bitterly, his jaw tightening. "I should have stopped them. I should have seen it coming. I should have protected her." Then, through the trees, the Pokémon Center came into view. Its familiar red roof stood out against the green foliage, glowing like a beacon of hope. "There it is," Brock shouted, his voice breaking through Ash's spiral of guilt. They burst through the sliding doors, the cool air of the lobby washing over them, as Nurse Joy looked up from the reception desk, startled by their sudden entrance. "No, Joy, ye Gail, Kyle, and Mrs. Joy," Brock called out, his voice urgent. We need help. She's hurt. Noorziyoi's eyes widened when she saw May in Ash's arms. Without hesitation, she grabbed a stretcher from the side of the room and motioned for them to follow. Bring her this way, she said, her voice calm but commanding. Ash carefully placed May on the stretcher, his hands trembling as he pulled away. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and it took everything in him not to break down right there. Chansey waddled up beside Nurse Joy, clutching a tray of medical supplies in its stubby arms. Together they wheeled May into the emergency room, the doors swinging shut behind them with a soft thud. And just like that, she was gone from their sight. Ash stood frozen, his arms hanging limply at his sides as the weight of the moment crashed down on him. The adrenaline that had carried him this far drained away, leaving only fear and guilt in its place. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I should have protected her, he muttered, his voice muffled. Ash, Brock said, sitting beside him. His tone was steady but gentle, the way it always was when he needed to be the voice of reason. You did everything you could. Don't blame yourself. May's strong, she'll pull through. Brock's right, Max said, though his voice wavered. He sat on the floor with Torchic in his lap, stroking the little Pokemon's feathers in an attempt to calm them both. She saved Torchic, he said quietly, his throat tightening. She didn't even think about it. She just jumped in front of it. Ash lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. Because that's who May is, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. She'd do anything to protect her Pokémon. Max nodded, clutching Torchic closer as the little Pokémon let out a soft chirp. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The usual comforting hum of the Pokémon Center's machines felt unbearably loud in the silent tension that surrounded them. Ash's slick bounced anxiously as he stared at the closed emergency room doors. Every time a shadow passed behind the frosted glass, his heart leapt into his throat. Finally, after what felt like hours, the doors swung open, and Nurse Joy stepped out. Her expression was serious but not grim. She's stable, she said, and the group let out a collective sigh of relief. Ash felt his shoulders sag as the tension left his body, replaced by a wave of exhaustion. But, Nurse Joy continued, her tone gentle, she's going to need time to recover. That energy pulse caused some serious internal damage. She's lucky it wasn't worse. Can we see her? Max asked, his voice small, his eyes wide and pleading. Noorzi nodded. Oh, just for a few minutes, she said. She needs rest. The group followed her into the room, their footsteps hushed as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace inside. May lay on the hospital bed, her face pale but peaceful. An IV drip was attached to her arm, and a monitor beeped softly beside her. Torchic hopped onto the bed without hesitation, curling up beside her and nuzzling against her side. It let out a soft, content chirp, as if reassuring itself that she was still there. Ash stepped closer, placing a hand on the edge of the bed. His throat tightened as he looked down at her. Hang in there, May, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. We need you. Max stood at the foot of the bed, his hands gripping the rail tightly. She's going to be okay, right? He asked, his voice trembling. She will, Brock said, placing a comforting hand on Max's shoulder. She just needs time. The room fell silent as they stood around her, the weight of what had happened settling over them. They had won the battle, but the cost had been high, and as Ash stared at May's peaceful face, he could only hope that time would be enough to bring her back to them.